college football is the lifeblood for so many people. I mean, I live here in the South, in God's country, where we love God and we love our football. And sometimes that gets flipped around. I'm not saying that's a good thing whatsoever, but I wanted to have an expert on. I wanted to have somebody on to talk about college football, the good, the bad, their favorite teams, the things they're concerned about, and whatever else they want to talk about. And that's why I reached out to the Rock Boys. And I have Jay from the Rock Boys here. Jay, thanks for being crazy enough to come on my show.
Yeah, appreciate you having me. I'm fired up to talk some ball.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I tell you this. I ran across you, and I was like, wow, I dig it. I mean, you do such a great job. So let's dive right in. How did you get started in the whole YouTube thing?
Wild. So I was a full-time teacher, and what happened was I was teaching, decided to dabble in talking some college football into a microphone, and as we got a little bit of traction, decided to quit my teaching job for a year, see what I could do with Rock Boys football, and all of a sudden it kind of worked out, and that's kind of where we're at right now. I think did we lose you?
No, I'm
Oh,
here.
you're there. Perfect. Yeah. So that's how it went. Sorry, I'm not used to doing these, so I didn't see you on the screen. Thought we lost you. Yeah, but that's kind of the storyline to Rock Boys football.
And how long ago was that?
That was I started in 2021,
Wow.
and I was a full time teacher for 2 years. After the 2023 season, I decided to do it full time for a little bit, and that's kind of where we're here now. So it's been wild, and the sport's been amazing. So appreciate if you guys are from Rock Boys. Appreciate you guys always supporting the fellas, and it's been a blast.
Well, Jay, when I mentioned that you were going to be on the show, I had a bunch of people start going, "Hey, I love those guys," and I'm like, "Well, good, and me too." So glad to have you on. Glad to have you on. So let's get straight into college football. What's good? What's bad? You pick the order about the current state of football, especially after this past weekend. We had some questions answered. I mean, you have Bama losing at Tennessee. You have Georgia, who was playing kind of piss poor with Mississippi State in Sanford, right? 10-point win over a bad Mississippi State team. Almost lost to Kentucky, and you're like, oh, Texas has this. Where are you at mentally when you're looking at college football, the 2024 season right now?
You start off with the good. I think the good is there is a lot of it seems to be a lot of parity in the sport. I mean, you go back 4 or 5 years ago, like Clemson was one of those teams. You had Ohio State, you had Bama, you had Georgia, and it seemed like there was such a gap between those teams. And one of the storylines I think as a college football fan in general, I think is really exciting is there's probably 15 teams that you can make an argument are legitimate threats in the college football playoffs. And I thought there was so much noise around if we expand it to 12 teams, it's going to be the same 4 that are playing for national championship. And those kind of prelim playoff games are not going to be very competitive. And I think we're seeing that they're going to be very competitive. I mean, you even take a look at a Boise State team that gave Oregon a run for their money in week 2. That might be the group of 5 team. They kind of showed that they might be able to compete at the highest level of the sport. I think the general parity between a lot of these top teams in college football, it leads to more exciting Saturdays for college football fans. And I think we've gotten that in 2024. I mean, you sit down and watch the Bama Tennessee game or the Georgia Texas game. They're really good football games every single week. And I think the parity has a lot to do with what we're seeing on Saturdays.
Who would have thought that at this point of the season, the race for the top of the SEC would be between LSU and first-year head coach at Texas A&M, Mike Elko? Where's your headspace there with those two teams?
Those are two teams that, in my mind, and honestly, very similar to kind of how we've talked about with Clemson. Like, I feel like they're just getting better as the 2024 season goes on. Like, you go back and watch LSU losing to USC neutral site. You look at Texas A&M losing to Notre Dame at home. So now those two teams maybe not true contenders in the SEC. Now you fast forward halfway through 2024, and it's like they're sitting at the top of the SEC. I'm not necessarily sure they're the best 2 teams in the SEC, but they're certainly showing that they are 2 teams that can be very dangerous within that conference. again, the SEC is going to heat up. And for college football playoff landscape conversation, I'm fascinated to see how many SEC teams actually get into the college football playoffs, because it seems like they're just picking each other apart the last couple of weeks. We kind of have a feeling the college football playoff committee is going to lean to some of those SEC teams, but I'm excited to see how many of those SEC teams actually get into the playoffs come end of November here.
That's a great point there. Let's talk about Ole Miss. Our old buddy Lane Kiffin. You know, the thing about Lane is we know he has an incredible offensive mind.
Yes.
But we've seen them drop some games. Can they drop any more games and get into the college football playoff?
No, I don't think so. And you said it, like Lane Kiffin in the offense, that's what you know Lane Kiffin for. That's the reason I think they're losing football games right now. I mean, in this Ole Miss defense, you even look at the numbers, it's a pretty dang good defense, and you can tell they put a lot of emphasis on getting dudes on the defensive side of the football to compete at the highest level of the SEC. And for whatever reason, with all that talent, Jackson Dart, Trey Harris on the outside, Juice Wells coming over from South Carolina, the offense hasn't clicked the way we kind of thought it would. And you look at their 2 losses so far, I think you run that Kentucky game back 10 times, Ole Miss is probably winning 9 of them. And even against LSU, they had LSU on the ropes. LSU wasn't winning the football game until they scored in the overtime to win the game. This Ole Miss team, I think Ole Miss is going to be a season wrecker for some SEC teams, because they have the team to compete with any team in the SEC, but I'm not necessarily sure. They probably get in with 2, I would think, with only 2 losses, but they got to be perfect if they want to be in that college football playoff conversation, at least from where it sits right now.
So let's stay with the SEC right now. This is a question that's brewing. As you said, they're beating up on one another. And we're starting to see this more and more than we've seen in a while. I remember there was one year, good grief, don't quote me on this, it was like 07, 08, somewhere in there, a long time ago, when I had a lot more color in my hair and less gray, that the SEC beat up on one another, and it actually cost them. Now, the playoff is triple in size. Heck, even then, they didn't have a playoff. But where does the committee draw the line on them, on the SEC, if they start to beat up on one another so much to where you step back and go, dude, you have 3 losses, I'm not putting you in? What's your thoughts on that?
That's a really good point. And I think the conversation is just how good are these SEC teams. And we've talked about this when you're kind of power ranking the top teams in the landscape of college football. Go watch the Tennessee Bama game, or go watch the Georgia Texas game, and then go watch the Oregon Ohio State game and tell me who were the best teams that we saw in all those 3 of those football games. I would personally argue right now that the most impressive football game, the most well-played football game, was between Oregon and Ohio State. Now, that's not me getting up here and saying the SEC ain't a good conference, because we all know it is. How good or how much better is the SEC compared to a conference like the Big Ten? That's the conversation that I think the committee is going to have to try to determine at the end of the season, when you're talking about a 2 or 3 loss SEC team versus maybe a 1 or 2 loss Big Ten team or ACC team.
Let's talk about that comment you made there. Ohio State, Oregon, a heck of a game. Anyone could have won that ball game. I'm still shocked that Howard slid as a 5th-year senior, but I was laying in bed watching it on my phone. I had actually laid down, and I was like, I have to get up early tomorrow morning. I'll flip on the game, and there it was. I was laying in bed going, what are you doing? Anyway, and I'm not a Buckeye whatsoever. I mean, obviously, you know who I pull for. Let's talk about kind of pivot to another conference, but it's in relation to what you just said with both of these conferences. The Big 12. You have Iowa State, you have BYU. Is it just me, or are you having a hard time buying them when you compare them to Ohio State, Oregon, etc.?
I hope you don't have many Big 12 listeners in the chat right now, but the Big 12 listeners have been on me lately, and I've been I'm kind of with you. I'm just not buying it. Like, you look at Iowa State, the number 1 team in the Big 12, top 10 ranked team in the AP poll. All right, what are their most impressive wins? I mean, they just went to the end of the 4th quarter to beat a UCF team that lost 3 straight. Now they're 4 straight. You look at their most impressive win on the season is probably a 1-point win against Iowa. Iowa just lost outright to Michigan State. And so I look at the Big 12 and say, let's be frank. I don't think they're at that tier of the other Power Four conferences that we see. I guess in short, I'm not buying the undefeated Iowa State as a legitimate top 10 team. And quite frankly, I don't really think they're even close to the level of a lot of these other teams. I was happy they moved up Clemson over Iowa State in the new rankings because I thought that was wild. Yeah, I guess in short, I'm not necessarily buying the Big 12 right now.
BYU, I'm looking at them, and it's like, I know you're undefeated. I know what you're ranked. I just don't buy them either.
Yeah. Same. And when I look at the Big 12, like I thought Utah with a healthy Cam Rising could have been kind of dangerous. Without Cam Rising, we kind of see what they look like. I think the highest ceiling team is Kansas State. From a pure talent standpoint, what team in the Big 12 do I think could jump up to the college football playoffs and compete with college football playoff caliber teams? It would probably be Kansas State. And I know I'm going to get some flack because they got shelled by BYU a couple weeks ago. You kind of watched that game and say it was a little bit wonky. You had a young quarterback in Avery Johnson that did not play very good football, but from a pure talent standpoint, I think Kansas State would have the best shot at dealing with some of those big dogs in the college football playoffs. But outside of that, I mean, we know the Big 12 champ is going to get a bid to the college football playoffs. I'm just not convinced they're going to be extremely competitive when they get there.
Also, think about this. BYU travels to UCF this weekend.
Yeah, wild one.
A wild one. I called that there was a good chance that Malzahn would beat Iowa State because his MO as a coach, he does really well against really big teams.
Yeah.
But it's almost like when he plays a team that's not that good, it's like, oh, we'll win this, guys. We got this. And they lose. And I think that had that been different for him, his coaching career would read quite differently. They have BYU. BYU, get this, is a 2.5-point underdog going into this. So, I mean, it makes our point for us.
That game is going to come down to if UCF, because I think from a talent standpoint, I think UCF's a more talented team. They've done some really good work in the transfer portal. They're recruiting the state of Florida quite well. Then it gets to, can they play good football? Because what BYU's been really good at, I mean, they're forcing turnovers. They're playing good football when it matters. They're like, you look at BYU and Iowa State and say, I don't know if they're the best teams in the Big 12, but they've been the most consistent teams in the Big 12, and that's something we don't get from that conference very often. It's going to be a fun one, and I think it's very contingent on what version of UCF you get. They've gone to Ja'Cory Brown as the quarterback. Can't really throw the football. He's 8 of 20 against Iowa State with 2 picks, but he can run it, and UCF is going to run the football a lot. Now, can BYU stop it, get off the field? That's probably what you're looking at, but I'm with you. That one I had circled as, look, Vegas knows what's up. Yeah, I think that's going to be a very close football game between those two teams.
Let's go back to the Big Ten. I don't buy Penn State, and I'll give you just my synopsis. So if you have Penn State fans or some of your viewers are watching me for the first time, let me explain. I grew up very close to the Georgia line, so I grew up in the shadows of Clemson. But Clemson's very close to the Georgia line, not too terribly far from Athens, Georgia. So I knew a ton of Georgia Bulldog fans. Mark Richt, they were like, Mark Richt's a good man. He's not a terrible coach. He will never get us to the promised land. To me, James Franklin reminds me so much of Mark Richt. They're not a bad football team. They can beat a lot of teams. But when Ohio State, they play them, when and if they play Oregon, we know what's going to happen. Do you buy Penn State at number 3?
That's the conversation my brother and I have had quite often the last couple of weeks. The reason to be optimistic about Penn State, in my personal opinion, is they finally made a change at the offensive coordinator spot. Like, what's been the problem with Penn State when they bumped up against teams like Ohio State? They just haven't had the explosive offense to hang in games. We ain't got no question marks about that Penn State defense. This is going to keep them in every single game they play. But on the offensive side of the football, they never could match Ohio State in terms of firepower. Yeah, some of that has to deal with talent, but some of that has to deal with the offensive play calling for Penn State's been so bland the last couple of years. They go out and hire Coach Cold Nicky from Kansas, who had a top 10 offense in terms of explosive metrics at Kansas with talent. We all know what Kansas recruits it. And they've had some good players the last couple of years, so maybe that's not fair. But what Coach Koldenicki did was create a very, very explosive offense for Kansas. They give you a lot of different personnel. They give you a lot of different looks, and they're able to hit some explosives. Now, Penn State brings him over as their offensive coordinator. You look at Penn State, they got a top 10 scoring offense in the country this year. Now, the question is, I'm kind of exactly in your camp on this. Is that going to be different? Is that going to be the difference maker between the Penn State teams we've seen the last couple of years where they go 10-2 with losses to Ohio State and Michigan? Or is that the difference maker where, hey, Penn State goes up against an Ohio State and is able to get it done? That's the question. I am more optimistic now with the new offensive coordinator than I've been in previous years, but I'm not necessarily sold. I'm kind of in your camp. Like, I'm going to wait till James Franklin does it to get on the bandwagon of Penn State being kind of a legitimate top team in the country in 2024.
Everybody, I have Jay from Rock Boys here. Below the video, I have a link to their channel. If you haven't watched these guys, I mean, come on, man. Come on. You got to do it. Get with the 20th century. I know we're in the 21st. And subscribe to them. Let them know you saw him, one of the duo on the channel here. So I do appreciate you being on. Let's talk about a team very near and dear to my heart. I'm surrounded by all their garb right here. For any of my viewers, they know that I'll take the gloves off on my team because I think if you actually care about someone, you don't beat them, but you don't lie to them. You don't lie about them. Clemson has not been the Clemson of 2018, 2016 for quite a while. We've saw a very lazy type of offense over the past few years. We saw the opening game against Clemson, or against Georgia, excuse me. They got blown out in the second half, but there's 4 quarters of football, so you can't run from that one. We see 6 weeks of Clemson pretty much doing what they want to do. They're ranked 7th total offense, and the difference between this year and other years is the offense is not only moving the ball at will, except for that one game, they're getting into the end zone. You're an outsider looking in. Tell me what you see with Clemson. By the way, folks, they did a great video on Clemson just recently, so you should check that out. But I want to hear from you, Jay, on my channel, what you're seeing with Clemson and your honest thoughts.
They can attack the deeper third more. I think the biggest problem with Clemson back as 2023 was who were the difference makers on the outside that could work vertically down the field and really threaten a defense 20 plus yards down the field. You didn't really have that. And I think the injection of guys like Brian Wesco or a guy like TJ Moore has been huge for this Clemson offense, because who are your playmakers like Antonio Williams, James Stewart? Like they want to work the short intermediate parts of the football field. Having a set of wide receivers and TJ Moore that can work vertically gives them so much more space to operate. I think that is probably the biggest storyline. But I think the second storyline that I think so many football fans miss, and I've certainly been guilty of this, is just assuming players can't get better. You know, like Cade Klubnik was a first-year starter last year. He was in a new offense with Garrett Riley. And I think more importantly, you look at the storyline heading up to 2023 was Clemson had like 2 scholarship wide receivers that were healthy in fall camp heading into that season. You could tell that there was just not a lot of continuity within that Clemson offense. Young quarterback, banged up pass catchers, new offensive coordinator. I wasn't so quick to write this Clemson offense off heading into 2024 when you have a quarterback that we all know is talented, now is taking a step as a second-year guy, a second-year starter, I should say. You're year 2 in the Garrett Riley offense, which I think Dabo Swinney's let Garrett Riley cook a little bit more. And I think most importantly, I think you got legitimate difference makers on the outside that is opening up. There's just so much more space for this Clemson offense to operate. I think those have been the 3 storylines for me that have led to Clemson having a top 10 scoring offense that we see in the country in 2024. And I think the question is, all right, it's about to get real after the bye week. You're going to play some better football teams. I think we're still kind of figuring out just how good this Clemson offense is. Like, I'm a Wake Forest alum. We ain't got a football team. We don't got the dudes to match up with you all on the offensive side of the football. We're going to figure that out over the next couple of weeks, and that's what I'm most excited about with this Clemson offense heading into November.
As a Wake alum, you know the ACC. Yeah. And we know the dip that it's taken over past few
Yes.
years. It's not good. I mean, I can remember. I'm old enough to remember the Barber twins playing for Old Man Welsh, him picking his nose on the sideline there. The Virginia, I go back to that. My first college football game was Bobby Bowden's Warwick Dunn led Florida State team coming to Clemson. Brian Dawkins was playing for Clemson. That ages me a bit there. So I've seen some good football in the ACC, but we're not really there right now. Let's talk about Miami. Everybody's going gaga over Miami. Cam Ward is the real deal. Restrepo is extremely talented.
Yeah.
He is a dog. Martinez, as soon as I saw them get him out of Oregon State, I went, that's a big deal. Let me qualify this question before I ask you this. I picked Texas to win this past weekend, and I broke one of my personal fundamentals, one of my personal rules. Look at who they have played. And when you look at who Texas has played up to this point, I'm not saying Texas is not a good football team. But when you look at who they've played up to this point, and then you look at Georgia, even as lazy as they've seen with Mississippi State and Kentucky, it kind of gave you a precursor to what was going to happen. Using that same benchmark, looking at Miami, their defense is giving up a lot of points, even though they're ranked number 21 total defense. They're giving up a lot of points to not great teams. Do you buy Miami as a whole, including, here's the caveat, here's the outlier, their coaching?
So, yes, I do. I'll preface that I think the ACC is right now running through Clemson and Miami. Like, I think those two teams have kind of separated themselves. I'd say I'd watch out for SMU with the quarterback change. You look at Miami, what makes it different? And you're right to mention the coaching staff. Like, we've had some massive question marks about in-game coaching for Mario Cristobal. What makes him different for me as a quarterback? I think they have the best quarterback in the country right now. At least Cam Ward's playing the best, like he's the best quarterback in the country. That's something that Miami hasn't had the last couple of years. Like, Tyler Van Dyke has been good in a few games, but as loses his mind in a few. And Cam Ward's a difference maker. Even when Miami has had some bad spells in this 2024 season, you look at Cam Ward and you just kind of know he's going to have the answers, which I think is a massive story in college football. Now, that doesn't mean Miami doesn't have question marks. I think I tend to, when I evaluate teams, bet on quarterbacks. Like, if you got a good quarterback, I tend to like chances in a lot of college football games. The Miami secondary has been a problem, a big, big problem. Now, I think the front seven's legit. They can get after the passer. The linebacker play has the back seven has not been good for Miami. It's young. You have some new faces in there. Can they get better over the next couple of weeks? That's probably the question, but I'm kind of with you. You go on the road and send a message beating Florida week 1. But outside of that, I mean, Virginia Tech, I think, might be getting better. You look at Louisville, I do think they're a solid team, but they haven't necessarily always looked like a top 5 team in the country. So I am buying Miami, and this is a long-winded answer. I apologize, because
no, please give it. I want you to give your answer, please.
Because Cam Ward, in my mind, is a difference maker, but there are still significant questions we have about this Miami Hurricanes team. If they want a legit contender, they're a legit contender in the ACC, but if they want to be a legit contender in the college football playoffs, you got to see that defense take a step, specifically in the back end of that defense.
We took some shots at the Big 12. You and I share the same concerns. They've earned that reputation to not be trusted. So it's not like you and I are sitting over here going, man, we hate the Big 12. We're throwing darts at a dartboard with the Big 12 symbol in it. No, the Big 12's asked for this for many, many years. I don't care who they've added to their conference. With that said, let's look at the ACC. Let's look at Clemson. You talked about Miami. You've talked about Clemson. We have an undefeated Pitt team who's played no one. We have probably a Louisville team that I would argue to say is better than a lot of the teams.
Agreed.
I mean, they've lost 3 games, 7 points each. I mean, it's a loss, but it's not like they're getting blown out. Do you see a chance of the ACC getting 2 teams into the college football playoff, or are we just right above the Big 12 And that's the perception of the brand of the ACC because we've earned it like the Big 12.
I think if two teams get in, it's probably a situation of Clemson, Miami running the table. This is the ideal situation for two ACC teams. Clemson, Miami on the table, see each other in the ACC championship game. Clemson gets it done. You have a one-loss Clemson team that won the ACC, and then you have a one-loss Miami team that didn't. Those are if the ACC is getting two teams in, I would think it are those two teams. Now, the question mark is, and I think this is a conversation that a lot of us are going to be having, is SMU. I don't think they're a college football playoff team, but they are playing better football than they did to start the year, making the switch at quarterback, and they got an easy schedule. Like, I think they'll be favored in almost every single one of their games in the month of November. So because of the scheduling, I think it's going to get wonky. But I do think the ACC probably does wind up with two teams, and those two teams, in my opinion, will be Clemson and Miami.
I think I tend to agree with you. The only way I would break away from that is if the conference championship was like a 2-touchdown plus win for whoever wins it. I think that would be the scenario. But if it's a close game, 12 teams, it's the big brands of Miami and Clemson.
I think that matters. Like, as much as it should, but I think as much as that,
please,
it matters, right? Like, the branding matters. Like, you get a one-loss Miami, one-loss Clemson, and Clemson wins an ACC champion. Like, they're both getting in. I think that's what the College Football Playoff Committee have done. We've seen them make brand decisions in the past. I do think that the what two teams are in the conversation from the ACC, I think it matters, and that's kind of why I went with Miami, Clemson too. I think they're the best two teams in the ACC by far. But I also think like the branding certainly matters in that conversation as well.
Yeah, it may not be ideal for a traditionalist, but that's reality.
Yeah,
it is reality. Yeah. Let's skim through. I'm going to go through the AP Top 25 and just kind of cherry pick some teams here and there to talk about. How about Army and Navy? I mean, Navy's coach, he was a first-year head coach. Last year, they opened up in Dublin. Notre Dame ripped their jersey in half. And now you have Notre Dame and Navy getting together this weekend in East Rutherford. I mean, it's a good story, and Army looks pretty good. Is there a snowball's chance in a hot place that one of these teams sneaks into the top 12?
If you beat Notre Dame, and correct me if I think they both play Notre Dame, I believe, and I might be wrong on that, but if one of those teams can go undefeated with a win against Notre Dame, yeah, I would think so. I'll be the first to admit I haven't watched a ton of Army Navy, so I don't have a ton of analysis about the football teams to give you. But I do think that an undefeated Army/Navy that is able to knock off a Notre Dame team that went on the road and beat Texas A&M, there's probably a chance. And I think a lot of college football fans would probably say like they probably deserve a shot if they haven't lost a game and beat a team like Notre Dame in the 2024 year.
I just looked at the schedule. Notre Dame does play both of them. And interestingly enough, at this time, Army and Navy are the only two ranked teams left on Notre Dame's schedule.
Yeah, Notre Dame has had they lose to Northern Illinois. They beat Texas A&M on the road, which I think will matter.
Right.
But that's because I think we thought like some of those games would be bigger games and they ain't. Yeah, Notre Dame hasn't had a tough schedule, but with that win against Texas A&M, if they were on the table, they probably do get in.
Move on to another one. Hey, so when you're a guest on here, I'm just going to lob them at you,
Love
man.
it.
Just lob them. All right. We have Texas and Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt ranked for the first time in forever. They're not the regular Vanderbilt team. You might want to take a picture of this because it's probably not going to happen for another 20, 25 years. Texas is licking their wounds. I mean, they got beat dominantly by the Georgia Bulldogs. And, they have everybody there. Matthew McConaughey's all over there going, all right. And that didn't help them. So my question is, do we see Vanderbilt maybe taking advantage of them looking back at the game? Or is this basically like, no, Texas is going to take care of business?
You probably got two different scenarios. One, a Texas team that is looking back, or a Texas team that is like, hey, we gotta figure it out, and we're gonna be a buzzsaw. Because let's be frank about it, like Vanderbilt, as fun as they've been with Diego Pavia at quarterback, they don't have the dudes that Texas does. Like you just look at those two teams walking into that stadium, like you can kind of see a difference between what Texas looks like and Vanderbilt. So if Texas is coming, they play their best football. I don't think that's an upset spot, but I do think you have a good point. Like if Texas is looking back and they're not taking this game seriously, they could get hairy because Diego Pavia is a difference maker. He's a playmaker. I do think Vanderbilt being ranked matters. Like this is not in the previous years, this is a kind of a sleepwalk game. Like you're probably prepping for the game that you got next Saturday, kind of overlooking Vanderbilt. I don't think Texas will do that because we just saw Vanderbilt beat Alabama. We see a Vanderbilt team that is a ranked top 25 team. I think you're going to get a buzzsaw Texas version. I do think Texas wins that football game. Not to be as a lame answer, but that's my take on that football game there.
Not a lame answer. It's what you think, my man. So get this. So you have Vanderbilt this week for Texas, ranked number 25, followed by Florida, Arkansas, Kentucky, and then at this time number 14, Texas A&M. So this is the last ranked team that Texas is going to play until the end of the season, unless something crazy happens. We know Florida's not going to be ranked. That's a dumpster fire down there. So let's talk about Florida for a second. Florida kind of got lucky recently. We've seen them win a couple of games that I didn't think that they would win. They absolutely destroyed Kentucky. I know Kentucky is not just amazing, but remember, Kentucky they've done some good things this year, or been a problem at least. But we see Florida winning against UCF. They took Tennessee to overtime. A lot of Tennessee fans are really ticked about that. You have Mississippi State. They won that ball game. They're 4-3 and 2-2. And quite frankly, I thought by this time of the year that maybe, just maybe, Napier wouldn't have a job. Now, of course, they play Georgia coming up on November the 2nd. Then they play Texas, LSU, Ole Miss. It might come during that time. Yeah. Do you see him finishing out this season as the head coach, or is it like
I do think he finished, because I think if he wasn't going to finish it out, he would be candle. I think he'd be fired already. And if you were planning on firing Billy Napier, probably would have came maybe after the loss against Texas A&M. The thing with Florida that like is a frustrating conversation. I don't think the roster's all that bad. And like you see them go toe to toe with a team like Tennessee and say like they can match up. But my biggest issue with Billy Napier is the same old stuff that has been kind of costing Florida games going back to last year and in 2022. I think Florida, I don't necessarily know if Billy Napier will be back in 2025, but I think they would have fired him already if they were planning on getting rid of him in the middle of the season. That being said, you get boat raced by a couple of these teams that are really, really damn good. That could happen. But at this point, I think it would already happen right now if they were going to fire Billy.
All right. So I know we're getting close to the end of the show, and everybody, thank you so much for joining me. Stick with me. Don't run away. But we have Jay from the ROC Boys here. I have the link below the video. Click on it. Let them know you saw him here. Him here. That's weird. Anyway, sorry, in a quirky mood today, but I'm glad to have him on. I'm going to put you on the spot. With a couple of things. I have two questions that I'm going to ask you. One, is there a chance, and I'm not talking about a Bobby Dodd misquotation chance here, is there a chance that Florida State does the unthinkable and beats Miami at Hard Rock, or are they just that bad?
I think they're just that bad. Oh my God. I had my question marks going in for Florida State, and I took a lot of heat for not taking Florida State to win the ACC. When you can't, I won, the quarterback was a problem with DJU. I'm not saying there wasn't, but it wasn't just the quarterback. Like, one, I think this team arguably has quit on the season. Like, they just didn't look like they wanted to play the last couple of weeks. But I think more importantly, that offensive line's a disaster. going up against the Miami Hurricanes front seven that although the defense has not been great, the front seven can get after it. They got after it against Louisville. I don't see how Florida State blocks up Miami up front. The defense has some playmakers, but it's kind of sporadic. I think Cam Ward's going to be able to put up enough points. I don't think that game will be very competitive. Now, my one thing that makes me nervous about saying that is in these rivalry kind of games, it gets funky. But when I look at the matchup, I just don't see Florida State getting off the mat and beating this Miami team.
Yeah, I watched the Duke game the other night, and of course I watched the Clemson Florida State game, and I made this statement, and someone said, well, if didn't happen. Well, when you play a good football team, and I agree with that. I do agree with that. I'm not being just combative here. But with that said, when you play longer in this, go further and further in the season, you will face if. If will happen. And so I've said that if Florida State could catch the football, that game with Clemson might have been different. The game against Duke, I believe it was Friday night. I mean, that was a beautiful throw from the freshman quarterback. I mean, they brought him in, the kid out of Savannah. He threw a beautiful pass. He can play. That was a beautiful pass he threw. The wide receiver just absolutely dropped it. So for me, I'm not even worried about the quarterback play to a point. I'm sitting here going, if you throw a catchable ball, they can't catch it. It's just bizarre.
Totally with you. Like, yeah, the quarterback play, like DJU wasn't great for Florida State, but they are one of the worst rushing offenses in the country. They cannot pass protect, and they got wide receivers that when they get open, which is not very often, they don't catch the football. Like you said, there are so many. Like, I think the national media likes to hyper focus in on the quarterback, which again hasn't been good. But man, that the rest of that Florida State team on offense, it is an absolute dumpster fire. They don't have any sort of identity. I don't think they know what they want to do on offense. It just maybe Florida State can keep it close because Miami secondary has struggled. But even if they do get open, like we're going to be making the throws and catching the football, that's a big question mark with Florida State here.
I believe in recent history, and recent history says they dropped the ball.
Yeah.
I'm with you. Florida State, everybody's hanging the failure of the season on DJ, but if you watch Florida State,
so bad.
It's a team effort, and it's a coaching effort as well. All right, last question, putting you on the spot. Top 25 here. I just sent the top 25 over to you. I don't know if you can see it or not, Jay. Go through there, and there's no limit. You don't have to take anyone, though I believe you will take at least one, maybe two. Going through that, let's just narrow it down to the top 15. I'll make it a little easier on you. Top 15. Who are your pretenders? Like you're sitting there going, I don't care what they're ranked. I just don't buy it.
Top 15. I think we started with Iowa State and BYU. So I think y'all kind of know my stance on that. I'm going to go to a team in Indiana, and they have been just a puzzling football team for me pretty much all season. I'm not necessarily saying they are a pretender because you go watch that Nebraska game and they just look really, really good. Until that football game, they hadn't played anybody. And so, yeah, the product on the field looks great. And the difference between Indiana and Iowa State are, like, Iowa State hasn't necessarily looked that great. Like, they go a really close game with UCF. They go a really close game with Iowa. Like, Indiana's been blowing the doors off of everybody they've played. First pretty good team they play is Nebraska. That game, to me, in the end, I hope they ain't no Indiana fans listening to this because they're just going to keep telling me and I might just be wrong on Indiana. Did that game snowball a little bit with the true freshman quarterback on the road in Bloomington? I'm still not sold in Indiana because I'm kind of a guy that has historically leaned into talent and like following the high school recruiting trail and what teams have the talent to really be dangerous in college football. And I just continue to question mark if Indiana is that team that has the talent to be a top 15 team in the country.
I try not to go after people, no matter even if they're a coach, especially if they're a player. I'm very, very careful. There's something about Cignetti's posture that is making me go, man, all it's going to take is one good beatdown, and this whole vibe he's putting off, it comes crashing down. And I've seen, just watching football for many, many years, it just seems like it's setting up something that they will not be able to recover from. What's your thoughts on that, or am I just imagining
No,
that?
that's actually so funny you say that because he gave a speech when he got named the head coach at Indiana. He's like, "We're gonna go to Ohio State. We're gonna take them. We're gonna go to Michigan." And I looked at it the same. I was like, "This is a little off-putting. I don't like this guy particularly much. I don't. He's a proven winner. Like everywhere he's been, he's
Sure.
football games, and so he might be building something special with Indiana. And although maybe he's not the most likable guy in my eyes, he's put a really good product on the football field. I think the one question you have is this is a built through the transfer portal. So when you do suffer some of those losses, like is it all gonna? You've already seen Indiana players opt out. I think they've had 3 opt outs in just this week. When you do face some adversity, what does this Indiana team look like? That's certainly a question. Indiana's a team that is still just like got my brain in a pretzel. Can't figure them out still.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's like, okay, great. You've done what Indiana has not done, and
Yeah,
that's win ball
win
games
games.
consistently. So that's definitely turning the ship in the right direction. But all of the other stuff, you're just saying, oh
Yeah,
no, I've
yep.
seen this before. Okay, let's. Is there any other teams you're seeing as a pretender right now that you'd like to add to the list before we move to this second part? And we're going to go 15 through 25. Who should be you think in the top 15 or maybe top 12? So
In the top 15, I might. You know what? No, I say Iowa State, BYU. Now I'll throw one more. Notre Dame. I think they got a Texas A&M team with a new head coach that didn't play their best football. I haven't been super impressed with Notre Dame in the back half of the schedule. Again, I think they probably should have lost that game to Louisville. Louisville, I believe, outgained them by over 100 yards in that football game. Notre Dame's probably the last one that I got some question marks about.
yeah, I agree with you. I think that it was too much too soon for Marcus Freeman. I mean, the guys.
Yeah,
I like. I mean, he was a rising star, and it's all of a sudden he's the head coach of Notre Dame, and it's like, I mean, this it's kind of like injecting steroids into your body. Yeah, it changes things really fast, but watch the payout there. So I don't know if this is going to hurt him in the long run. I've seen this at Clemson when Sweeney's hired guys that were former players who, maybe they were just starting out in their career. It was too much too soon, and guess what? He had to fire them. Let's talk about, okay, this is the last, and then, any final thoughts from you? Let's go from 16 to 25. Any teams that you could see legitimately making their way into potentially the college football playoff?
I think circle back on this team. I think they are a team that is constructed to be a top 12 team in the country. You go to that again, you go to their 2 losses, they play just a really bad football game against Kentucky. Again, winning that game for most of the game and then figure out a way to lose it. Very similar conversation to LSU. They don't convert in the red zone a couple times. Had the opportunity in the third quarter to really put LSU away in that football game. Didn't. Yeah, and that team, I think, can go toe-to-toe with anybody in the country, which I don't think you can say with a lot of those back half teams. The one other team, and I know Brady Cook's banged up, so I don't know if look, Missouri was a team I loved heading in. I thought they checked so many boxes, thought they had a veteran quarterback, Coach Strink doing a phenomenal job with culture, guy like Luther Bird, and I thought they had the complete roster as well as the star talent to be a top 12 team. But at a certain point, it's just like if you don't look like it every single week, at some point, I just got to let go of them. That's a team that, there's still a pathway in, and they're playing an Alabama team that has not looked very good over the last couple of weeks this weekend. But at the end of the day, they just haven't looked like a college football playoff team. I think I'm ready to maybe cut my ties with Missouri after picking them as a top 8 team in the country heading into 2024.
Well, hey, we all get something wrong, and so I'm of the mindset: have a strong opinion, but be willing to admit when you're wrong, and so that's incredible. Jay, I've talked about where we can find you. There's a link below, but tell us all the areas we can find you, except for your home address.
Yeah, Rock Boys Football on Twitter, or X, I guess you say Twitter, and then obviously on the YouTube channel. The Clemson fans have been awesome. It's been a blast talking this team and appreciate you having me on too. I had a blast. It's always a blast to talk about some college football than just with my brother. So appreciate you having me on. It's been a blast.
Well, Jay, thank you for working with the schedule. I'll let everybody know who's made it up to this point. I reached out to you like the day before or the day of Hurricane Helene, and I was trying to get you on, and then it was on me so I would have had you on much sooner. But thank you so much for coming on the show. Everybody, drop by there, let them know that you saw Jay here on my channel. Well, folks, I hope you'll subscribe if you like what you're watching. Even though I'm a big Clemson fan and stuff, I love talking college football myself. Subscribe. Remember, it's the sweetest words in the English language. Free. So I do appreciate it. Jay, you take care of yourself. Folks, as always, go Tigers.